voter ID laws, and mail-in voting. Issues where Americans are. We've covered how voters on the left and right are opposed to gerrymandering for political advantage. And we know voters on both sides are opposed to the dirty money and excessive lobby influence in politics. The majority of Americans want to abolish the antiquated electoral college role in presidential elections. But Republicans continue to block election reform. There seems to be a couple sticking points. The biggest is voter ID requirements, which polling suggests is supported by voters across the political spectrum. And then there's this weird objection to mail-in voting.
And Mitch McConnell and I need to come up with an oversight of mail-in balloting. If we don't do something about voting by mail, we're going to lose the ability to elect a Republican in this country.
But when you peel back the rhetoric surrounding these two issues, it's really a ploy by corporate lobbyists and special interest groups from giving up their power in politics. Farouk, as a Republican, I keep hearing that mail-in balloting opens the door to voter fraud, but I live in a state where we've used it for many years, no problems. So what's the truth here?
5 states use mail-in voting exclusively. Many states have no-cause absentee voting available, something the military has used for decades. Mail-in voting fraud is rare.
Shut, the director of elections in the Colorado Department of State said there's just very little evidence that there is more than a handful of fraudulent cases across the country in a given election cycle.
According to the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU, there is no evidence that mail-in balloting increases fraud. There are too many anti-fraud protections in place which make it difficult to impersonate someone else or to steal ballots. Okay, so what about voter ID laws? Isn't this just common sense? Polling indicates it's a no-brainer. It absolutely sounds like a no-brainer. So I was curious as to why the ACLU pushes back on this issue.
Nearly 11% of Americans lack the proper ID, which is more than 21 million people. It places a greater burden on people of color and low-income citizens who lack the means to travel or to pay for ID.
Wait, sorry to interrupt, but that sounds like such a lame excuse.
There are places in Texas, for example, where it takes over 4 hours to travel to the nearest location to obtain an ID. A person may need to order documentation, such as a birth certificate, or be able to take time off work during the department's business hours, or again, may not have the financial means to pay for their state's approved form of ID.
But come on, if you're going to register to vote, you have to prove you are the person registering.
Again, this has been studied extensively, and in states with less strict ID laws, there is no significance in fraud.
So this might be a stupid question, but if there's so few isolated cases of voter fraud when it comes to mail-in voting and voter ID laws, why have so many states been enacting stricter rules, and why did Republican senators filibuster the Freedom to Vote Act?
Simple. Voter suppression of a segment of the population which tends to favor Democratic candidates.
There's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already, and so I think it's unnecessary.
Republicans seem to be misguiding Americans on the truth about mail-in voting and voter ID, thus dividing us over election reforms. This way they can sweep the dark money, gerrymandering, and other issues right out of view. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Let's stop this madness before it's too late.